Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast. You're listening here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brice Lewis. And today we have another jam-packed show of basketball action and basketball news for you. Obviously, I give you the rundown of what happens in the league. And, we're going to talk about just different things that have happened throughout the last few nights in the league. Some news coming out in terms of trades and potentially some recruiting. Also, we're going to talk about some college basketball later in the show. But now we're going to start off with with a topic of big thing that happened last night, or just big news, almost like a big topic that came out of the Pacers Heat game, as Jimmy Butler and T.J. Warren got into it last night. T.J. Warren ended up being ejected in the game for taunting at Jimmy Butler after both in the first, I believe earlier in the game, kind of got a technical foul, getting into each other, almost into a fight, talking smack to each other, and basically. This is big because obviously this is Jimmy Butler being Jimmy Butler. It's funny because, Jimmy Butler to me is one of my favorite players in the game. And a lot of people have criticized Jimmy Butler for going to the Heat and criticized him for thinking he is better than what he is. And basically, some people feel like that, he's, I guess he talks too much for their liking, I guess you could say. Jimmy Butler, everybody remembers what happened, especially in Minnesota with him, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Andrew Wiggins. A lot of memes have been about it on Twitter and whatnot. It's one of those funny things, honestly. Jimmy Butler is just a guy who he's a tough player. He never backs down and to any challenge. He'll never sit here and say, I know I'm a second-rate star and I'm going to be behind a first-rate star. He's going to view himself as the best player on his own team at all times because he feels like he is that good of a player and he's not scared of what people think of him. That's one of the reasons why he didn't really want to be in Minnesota or in the 76ers because, he knows that Embiid and Simmons and Karl-Anthony Towns and Wiggins, those are their teams. They were drafted here to be the guys. He was just here to help. But he doesn't want to be in that situation where he's there to help. He wants a team where he can say, this is basically my team. This is my, my decision that got me here. And so this is something that I think Jimmy Butler, has shown multiple times. I mean, even after the game, they were interviewing him and asking Jimmy Butler about what happened between him and TJ. And he was just like, he's not in my league. And if he wants to fight, then so be it. And, it doesn't matter to me. And so, Jimmy Butler is just about that action. So, it's always fantastic. A lot of old school players love it. They love it because, a lot of people believe that, people think that, the league is soft now. Everybody's buddy, everybody's friends. And Jimmy Butler still shows like, hey, regardless of whatever, I'm not afraid to challenge any of you. I think for the most part, Jimmy Butler also stays to himself and his entourage, even though he is fine with a lot of players that he hangs out with, obviously. And I think that, with all that being said, I think it works out for him. And, you can't really hate Jimmy Butler for being himself. And like I said, some people don't like Jimmy. Some people do like Jimmy. It just depends on where you sit on that side of the fence. I like Jimmy. So, he's just doing what he does out there and he's continuing to be the great player that he says he is. And he just shows it off and off the court and on the court. And, that's all you can really hope for. T.J. Warren, it's funny because T.J. Warren actually just came off his best game previously before last night's game. And obviously him getting kicked out of that game did not help Indiana's cause because Indiana was getting blown out at that point. So it wasn't a great game in general for Indiana, but the T.J. Warren thing definitely did not help out. And I think that's something that, obviously you don't really want happening. But it's funny because also Jimmy Butler on Instagram posted about he posted about the next time they play, which the next time they play is in March, and he posted the screenshot in the circle and said, all right, so we're going to play each other again. So if you got that action, then we'll see what happens when we play each other again in March. So it's definitely something I think we're going to keep up with when March comes around. We're going to look at, oh, snap, they're about to play each other again. What's TJ Warren going to do now? Obviously, jokes have already came out. People think TJ Warren's going to sit out the game, or maybe he'll, coach, I can't play. I got a knee. But, we'll have to see, man. I feel like this is good entertainment for the league. And I feel like this is what the league, it's always good to have this type of stuff happening. You always want something that's going to be fun and exciting and just different. Those passion and intensity on the court is what makes the league so interesting, in my opinion. And I think it just helps the league in general become a more interesting league. But another great news in basketball news from last night also are going to be talking about the Trae Young, James Harden matchup. Both players triple doubles, plus 40 plus points and against each other as the Houston Rockets beat the Atlanta Hawks, and one of the best games of the night. And it just shows you, like, both these players, they're the top at what they do. They play the game at a high level, and they compete at a high level. And you can't hate that. You can't hate that at all. I mean, if we break down each player individual, I think James Harden is second in backcourt voting in the All-Star. Trae Young is first in the Eastern backcourt. Both players are gifts to this game. Some of the best offensive players we have in this game. And last night was just a showcase of their skills and a showcase of their abilities. And that's something that you really, as an NBA fan, you would love to see. You would love to see things like that. You would love to see things in that regard. And I think it's something that really creates an atmosphere that a lot of people don't think about in most regards to that. Obviously, I've talked about it multiple times on this podcast about James Harden and the impact that he's had for this league, being one of the best one-on-one players in the league, his offensive prowess, his skill set. It feels like he tries to improve it and advance it every year. And it just shows you why he's continuously one of the better players in the league, why he's always going to be one of the top guys in the league. And, that's what you expect. But Trae Young, obviously, is a second year in the league. He's averaging monster numbers, I believe 28 points a game. And, I think that definitely makes sense. And we got to do what we got to do out there. Trae, the thing about Trae is a lot of people like to talk about, oh, he's shorter, he's smaller, whatever. And, he's showing, even with his size, he's still one of the best offensively skilled players. Like we've seen a lot of great offensively skilled players that were sure. Obviously, I take Thomas from a couple of years ago. And, and you think that in most regards to that, Trae's just improving that, or showing, again, of young players, small players, hey, I can still be just as good offensively as anybody in the league. And, there's nothing you can hate about that. There's nothing you can hate about that. So, in regards to everything that happened in the game, obviously both players went out. Obviously, James Harden early was kind of dominating in the Hawks game, and then Trae Young came on late. Honestly, it's a tale of two teams. Houston obviously is going to the playoffs with Russell Westbrook. Hawks looks like they're not, unless they have some historical second half of the season. I mean, I've said a couple of times that honestly, for the Hawks this year, it's been injuries. They're not good enough to have one of their key young players out and win, and it showed. They really have never had many games where they've had a fully healthy Jabari Parker, a fully healthy Trae Young, a fully healthy John Collins, a fully healthy Kevin Huerter, and the rookies, and played. When they did, they were 2-1. I believe they're 2-2 now. I mean, we don't know, because I don't think the Hawks will only be sitting here with 8 wins if everybody was healthy and never got hurt. That's just my personal opinion. Because I don't see, you know what I'm saying? I don't see that being an issue. I don't see why that would be such a problem in regards to their record. But obviously on the Houston side, they're competing for a championship. They're competing against the LA teams. They're showing that, or they're trying to get to that point where they feel like, okay, when we play these guys, we're going to be at the top of our game. We're going to be at the top of our levels, and we're going to be at the top of the Western Conference. Because obviously the Western Conference at the top is very bunched up. Obviously, Lakers are still number 1 seed, but they could be caught. And I wouldn't be surprised if Houston tries to make a run for that. Because Houston, they may feel like, hey, we can get a heads up on both of these teams and we get home court advantage on both of these teams. And obviously, with James Harden literally averaging 39 a game, it's incredible. It really is incredible. You would think a guy who's been in the league for so long, you would figure out ways to slow him down. He'll still be an elite scorer, but you'll slow him down. But it seems like his scoring goes up every year almost, even though he's been in the league for multiple times. It's one of those most interesting things that it's just extremely impressive to see James Harden do, but also Trae Young being very impressive, as people think he's the best guard in the entire Eastern Conference, which is very much deserved based off what he's done this season and how well he's played. But coming up next, we're going to get into some more news and notes around the NBA.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the Jimmy Butler versus TJ Warren situation. We also talked about the showdown, the matchup between James Harden and Trae Young and the duel they had in the ATL last night. And now we're going to get into some more news and notes around the league. Sorry about the 76ers. The 76ers are apparently looking to add more shooting at the trade deadline, which is something that they've definitely always needed since this team has been constructed. A lot of people have said that when they lost JJ Redick and they lost Jimmy Butler, when they replaced it with Al Horford and Josh Richardson, they're not really the best shooters, especially with the absence of JJ Redick. They never added a sharp shooter to replace him, and I think that's something that they're looking to add. They're looking to add a guy who can come in there and shoot the lights out of the ball, because you need somebody who can do some things and create more of an open space on the floor and more spreading on the floor because of that fact of the matter. I think it's something definitely they need to look into, because obviously you don't want to sit here and, be a one-dimensional team, especially with Ben Simmons not being able to shoot. You want to at least make sure everybody else on the floor is a threat to shoot, because you don't want to make it easier to be defended, especially people locking down maybe on Embiid or something like that, who is going to be the centerpiece kind of your entire offensive rhythm and flow that you have. So, that's kind of what they're looking for. There are plenty of shooters they can maybe get out there. It just depends on who's willing to give up who. Obviously, I think Danilo Gallinari, depending on how much they Oklahoma City wants, that would be a good move to make. I think, he's a guy who could definitely stretch the floor. Also actually has still some of an offensive game. So, I think that definitely that would be a good move if they can maybe pick up a Danilo. Maybe Andre Iguodala, maybe. He's not the greatest shooter, but he also adds like a great defender. So not only are you proving a defense that's supposed to be one of the best in the NBA already, you're obviously able to get a guy who could potentially get some guys that could shoot the three ball. So it's one of those things where you got to really look at, what are we trying to look for? Maybe an outside shot, maybe Kevin Love. Obviously, it's unlikely because they'll probably want a lot for him. Plus, where would he fit with the team? That would be a big question. Would he want to be on a team like that? Even though they'll be competing for a championship, would that work? Would they have to give up too much to potentially bring him into the team and bring him into the organization? They can look at Patty Mills. Obviously, the Spurs, they're fighting for a playoff spot, but the Spurs are not going to be that great this year. So maybe Patty Mills, a guy who comes off the bench, can lead your second unit, shoot the three, make some plays for you. Maybe potentially an Isaiah Thomas. Because these are more scoring guards in total instead of just a 3-point shooter, but can shoot the 3 ball, but also could score in general. Give you that punch coming off the bench if you put Simmons on the bench. Even in Wayne Harrington, or Joe Harris. Joe Harris led the league in 3-point percentage last year. So he would be a guy maybe you might want to look into maybe trying to bring in. And Davis Bertans from the Washington Wizards. He's a guy you could bring in. He's currently hurt right now, but he has been a marksman with the Wizards. Really, if I'm them, I would probably go for Joe Harris or Bertans. Maybe Joe Harris may be your best bet. It just depends. And I think, if they can have that shooting that they want, it will help them long term in the league. It will help them, getting themselves ready to make that final push towards the playoffs. And, you know what I'm saying? It's just one of those things that I think really, really matters for 76er fans if they want to make a run long term. That's something that obviously the 76ers have championship aspirations. They're doing all this to win a potential championship in the future. And they're going to try to do anything they can to potentially get them to that point where they can end up bringing the city of Philadelphia a championship that they have longed for a long time. The 76ers have very big expectations because of the fact that they've been close the last couple of years. This would be the year for them, for a lot of people to think, for them to break out and win it, get to at least to the NBA Finals, and see the growth and development of Embiid and Ben Simmons along that path, getting to that point, so that way they can produce and help to win a big-time game and big-time moments. And hopefully, get this team 100% ready to go and ready to, like I said, win a game, win the playoffs, and do what they got to do to be successful out there at the end of the day. In other news, Victor Oladipo. I talked about Victor Oladipo before. He now knows when he will be coming back to play basketball. Victor Oladipo, if you remember, suffered a torn quadricep last year before the Pacers made the playoffs, and that really basically, that kept him out for the playoffs and the beginning part of this season. Obviously, I think a couple weeks ago I reported that he was close to coming back. They just didn't know exactly when he would come back. But now they finally have a return date set on January 29th versus the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, Indiana's been a good team without him, but they don't have that extra oomph without him. And that's what Oladipo is supposed to bring, is that oomph. A lot of people don't think he's that big of a star, or they don't think he's at that level that can put him over the top, but we really don't know. Let's never forget he almost beat LeBron James in 7 games a few years ago in his last year in Cleveland. And honestly, the way that playoff looked, I mean, you could have made an argument. The Pacers could have made it to the finals to beat LeBron. So, and, I think, right now that's the target date. I think that's the date they want to go for. That's the date they want. I think Oladipo, like I said, has missed him. He's only 27. He's still young, man. He's still young. And he has plenty of game left in him. And he's just trying to get back to his old form. Because that January start will get him at least to about solid 2 months, 2.5 months maybe of basketball. So then he can probably try to get as close as he can to his full self where he was before the injury, going into the postseason for the Pacers. And then maybe that can help them maybe get a potential upset, maybe make the series interesting. Never forget, a lot of people feel like last year, if the Pacers had Victor Oladipo against the Boston Celtics, even though they got swept, they felt like they could have potentially beat the Boston Celtics if they had Oladipo. So it's one of those things where I'm glad that Oladipo is coming back. I'm glad he's about to come back and be a part of this great, league again, with the Indiana Pacers, trying to get them to the top of the mountain and trying to just shut up the haters and let people know that the Indiana Pacers are here to ball and they're here to compete against the best teams in the Eastern Conference. In the last news, we got some more bad news coming out of Cleveland. Cleveland's just a complete mess this year. So when describing his players, the head coach, former Michigan head coach of Michigan, the Cavaliers head coach, he said that they aren't playing, or they're starting to finally not play like a bunch of thugs. Now, obviously, this caused a lot of attention because obviously, you know, most of the league is black, most of his team is black, and obviously that's not a very kind word in the African American community to call African American men. And obviously, this is coming from an older white man, so this isn't always the greatest thing to say. He later was told by his coaching staff that he said that, and he was like, "Oh, I didn't mean to say thug, I meant to say slugs because we were playing slow." And then he reported after, when he met with his team, he gave an emotional apology to them, apologizing to them, saying that he did not mean that. That was not his intention. He was not trying to attack, slander, or insult the team. And it's just one of those things. You just got to watch what you say out here. Obviously, there's already been some players there. I mean, we already had a report earlier this year that Cleveland felt like he was treating them like children. He was treating them like they were still in college. And honestly, I just feel like this should be a one-year relationship for this head coach. It's just too much stuff's going on. That report, Kevin Love. I just feel like they brought in the wrong head coach. It's clearly showing right now that they brought in the wrong head coach. And if I'm the Cleveland Cavaliers, I would heavily look at moving on from your current head coach, because it just feels like Beeline. He's making too many mistakes that you shouldn't make as a team. You know, so. You know, I think that'd be, and honestly, with the season going the way it is, I think a total restart may be what's best for the Cleveland Cavaliers going forward. But coming up next, we're going to get some more news and notes around the league. You know, talk about the CP3 effect, why Oklahoma City is so good this year. A fan throws a drink at the Boston game, and Steph recruiting Giannis.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the 76ers looking for some more shooting at the deadline. Victor Oladipo having a return date for his return. And also the Cavs using some very choice language about his team and having to apologize for it. But now we're going to get to some talking. I want to give some love over to Oklahoma City and CP3 Chris Paul. And then I like to call this the CP3 effect. Obviously, Chris Paul is a guy who has been in the league for a while. A lot of people view him a certain way, especially at this point in his career, as he's an older player. Some people thought he was washed up. Some people thought that potentially he's not the same player. And when he was traded to Oklahoma City, it was just expected that he would just now be an average player at this point in his career. Then the team was young, and then they lost Russell Westbrook and Paul George. So the perception was that they wouldn't really be good at all this year in the Western Conference, especially with the Western Conference being the most dominant conference in basketball in most years. So this year, the Thunder currently are 22-15, which is shocking to a lot of people because they weren't expecting to be here. Now, about 2-3 weeks ago, they were under 500. Now they're about 5-6 games over 500, and they're at least 5 games above the person in the 8th spot. And it just shows you that Chris Paul can still affect things. And the reason why is Chris Paul has helped the young guys play and play to their best extent. They still have some talent with Steven Adams, Danilo Gallinari. Sage Alexander's playing well. Dennis Schroeder's still playing well. I mean, I always feel like Oklahoma City still had talent. I don't know why everybody thought like this team was talentless. They still had talent. I think Chris Paul actually helped Because one thing I feel like Chris Paul can do still at this point in his career is he can run the show. He can set you up to get your best shots possible. He can pull up and hit the three. He can pull up and still be clutch if needed. He has the ability to uplift players. That's one thing about him that he's always been able to do is uplift players. I always like to talk about this one thing that happened in the playoffs last year when Harden was off the floor, I believe when he had his eye injury in one of the games against the Warriors. And the offense was just run through Chris Paul, and the offense was as efficient as I've seen it been. Because it wasn't just James Harden make something happen. It's Chris Paul lead the show, everybody set up, get a three, get a layup, cut to the rim, move around, and Chris Paul will find you. That's why he's considered one of the best pure point guards in today's game, because of his ability to create and set up in today's game. And I think Chris Paul is doing it here in Oklahoma City. I think, it's interesting because a lot of people thought like he didn't deserve that contract. But at the same time, with the way he's playing, this could help Chris Paul potentially if maybe a team was like, oh, wait, Chris Paul could still play at a high level. You know what? We need a good veteran point guard who can run the show, maybe run second unit, maybe, you know what I'm saying? So maybe potentially we can maybe trade for him and we could add him to the team and he'll help us. And that's something that obviously you'll look at. I feel like if you're a championship team, you'll look at it. But at the same time, for Oklahoma City, when you're a team that came into the league with not high expectations and then you're doing well, and then you're doing well with a guy that some people think is overpaid, he's older, do you still let him off? Or do you keep him and just say, you know what, let's ride this wave, let's try to make the playoffs and see what happens? Now, obviously, I feel like it's still early in the season. We'll see if Chris Paul wears down. But at the same time, in saying that, too, this is what actually the situation is great in Oklahoma City. Because Dennis Schroeder I feel like it's a starting point guard who just comes off the bench. And he can play half the minutes or more minutes than Chris Paul nightly because he's younger. And you're not losing that much with Dennis Schroeder. So there may be nights they could just they really even up his minutes with shooters. Obviously, they sometimes do some 2-guard combo play. It just really depends. But, Chris Paul's going to be out there late. And they're probably not going to – and obviously they're not going to extend Chris Paul too much because they know he's a little older. So it's one of those things where it's like it's very interesting, I think, in my opinion, to see what happens with Chris Paul. And maybe there's some potential buyers at the deadline for Chris Paul and seeing if some people feel like Chris Paul may be worth maybe making that trade for. So it's definitely an interesting dilemma, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of the Chris Paul situation in Oklahoma City. But I just want to shout out to him for helping Oklahoma City be a better team, be a team that people didn't expect to be as good as they have been, and going out there and playing at a very high level, and honestly surprising the league and having a great record this year. In other news, we have news coming out of Boston. And, a fan threw a drink during the game, which he was arrested for and taken out. And I think that just goes back to what I've said in the past about basically we have to have more control over the fans at these games. Fans need to be more controlled. We need to be stricter with security or stricter with something, because obviously fans sometimes can get out of control. Especially, they come to these games, they get some alcohol in your system, then you start to get a little loose, you start to do some things, and then it's a highly emotional game, and then things could potentially happen. And obviously, like I said, obviously NBA, as you already know, if you've been an NBA fan for a while, everybody remembers the Malice in the Palace and what happened during that time. And obviously that's a time that they definitely never want to go through again. They never want to deal with again. And I think that, these are the type of situations you want to avoid. You don't want fans throwing drinks on the court. You don't want fans doing anything crazy. Obviously, remember the Isaiah Thomas thing from a couple of weeks ago, calling him out, using inappropriate language, making Isaiah Thomas go into the stands to say something to him. And then remember the reasoning for it. I just wanted a Frosty. So, It's one of those things that I feel like definitely the league, like I said, definitely has to look at how can we, like I said, the NBA is the only sport that allows the fans to get as close to the players as they do. And you just don't want any potential things happening that comes out of a situation that could result in something negative happening in the league. So it's definitely something I think is interesting. I think it's definitely something that the league obviously needs to just pay close attention to, keep an eye on, and make sure that nothing bad happens in regards to this situation, because you don't want any of these situations happening in the future. And, luckily nobody was hurt. Nothing really happened. Nothing was created. They handled the situation very properly and hastily at Boston. But, it's just something that, always these things happen. These are always discussions and conversations you have because you want to make sure that these situations are controlled and they don't really ever come up again and ever have to be addressed again by the NBA or by a team or by the league. You know what I'm saying? Just kind of in that regard. But and so on and so forth, that happens. And lastly, we're going to talk about Steph and Giannis played last night. Obviously, Steph's still out with his broken hand as the Milwaukee Bucks beat the Golden State Warriors. But one thing that was discussed was after the game, Steph and Giannis were having a little conversation. And obviously, some people were thinking, is this Steph trying to recruit Giannis to Golden State? I think it's interesting. People are wondering if that's what they were talking about. Steph later came back and said they were talking about a gamer tag. Now, a lot of people may feel like that may be false, but some people may felt like that he might have tried to or just get that little line in there. Hey, come to Golden State. Come here. Join us. And so it's something that, is interesting because it's something that you wonder about because obviously Giannis' free agency is coming up and pending. Obviously, Golden State is one of the teams that have been known to be interested. It's kind of funny because Golden State does anything they can to get another superstar there so they can dominate the league. But, and a lot of people wonder if that could potentially be the case. Obviously, I feel like a lot of people would not want Giannis to go to Golden State for obvious reasons because they just don't want what they had the last few years. But we'll have to see what happens. We really have to see what happens. So, it's just one of those things that's going to be very interesting to actually turn out and see what Giannis actually does when the free agency decision comes. But we know Steph Curry and Golden State will go all out to try to recruit Giannis so he can come to Golden State and join them so they can be a power for years to come. Coming up next, we're going to have some more news and notes around the league. We're going to talk about some Embiid and Davis out with some injuries, the Rose potentially on the move, Carmelo hitting a game winner, and what it means to have Melo being Melo back in the league.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we were talking about the CP3 effect in Oklahoma City, why Oklahoma City's had such a great start to the season. Also, fans throwing drinks at the Boston game and Steph recruiting Giannis potentially to join the Golden State Warriors. But now we're going to get into some more news, some injuries actually to start off this segment. Obviously, Embiid and Davis are out for a couple of games. Obviously, Joel Embiid's out for the game against the Boston Celtics with a thumb injury, with a dislocated finger. If you remember a couple of nights ago, Joel Embiid dislocated his finger. You saw an image of it on social media. Looked really, really bad, really, really disgusting. If you're sensitive to that type of thing, I would not advise you to go look it up. But if you like that type of stuff, go look it up. Davis obviously took a hard fall against the Knicks the other night with a back injury. They say he'll only be out for a couple of games, so he'll be back soon. But obviously, these are two of the premier big men in the league, and them being out, seeing how their teams do without them is going to be very important. Obviously, we got to see how the Celtics I mean, not the Celtics, but the 76ers do, because I feel like Embiid's more of a bigger loss to them than the Lakers, just because LeBron is better than Ben Simmons. And so you still got LeBron and the rest of the supporting cast where the 76ers don't have their main scorer. And so it's going to have to be made up in different areas and by other people. So that's definitely going to be an interesting situation, an interesting thing to keep up with long term. But back to some trade news. D Rose is potentially on the move. Some people think D Rose and Detroit might go to a split by trade deadline. D Rose is playing at a very high level for what this point in his career. He would be a great sixth man for any team that wants a sixth man. He is a guy who, a lot of people obviously support D Rose because of what happened with D Rose and his injuries. They want D Rose to be back where D Rose used to be, where he was one of the top guys in the league. He was one of the top players in the league. And like I said, a lot of people support him and they want him to be successful. So, he's potentially on the move. There are some teams that maybe can use him. If you're talking about contenders, obviously maybe the Lakers maybe could use Derrick Rose. I don't know if that could be a team potentially. The 76ers potentially, even though they're looking more for shooting. So D Rose isn't the greatest shooter, but he can get you buckets. So it just depends. That's a team obviously that could potentially go pick him up if they feel like he would be worth a playoff push. Maybe potentially Indiana. Michael Brogdon's been in and out of the lineup a lot this year. Maybe they want somebody more dedicated as his backup point guard, more reliable. So maybe D Rose come in there and help them. Especially if they get him and Victor Oladipo back, it makes Indiana a much more interesting team. Also, if there's a team that just wants him for the future, maybe the Atlanta Hawks, they need a backup point, even though they might have found somebody in Brandon Goodwin. Potentially, the Suns, adding him with Ricky Rubio in there. It really just depends. It really just depends. There's a lot of potential options for Derrick Rose to go. I feel like Derrick Rose is a guy who, like I said, can help a lot of teams in the league. And obviously, about the other guy Detroit's thinking about trading, Andre Drummond. So it sounds like Detroit may be just saying, okay, well, we're just going to try to get some trade value. We're going to try to get some players back. We're going to try to prove this team through maybe potential young players and potential draft picks that we're going to get out of these trades. So it's something definitely that you're going to look into if you're Detroit. I understand why they're looking into this because, like I said, you may feel like the team's not winning and the team's not going to be successful. Especially with Blake Griffin being out for the year, it's just like, we trade Rose, we trade Drummond, Blake's out. We start, reset, refill, replenish, get the team started over again in Detroit. I don't know if that means Blake Griffin's going to be in the future. We know why he's talking about it right now, but Blake Griffin could potentially be on the move because of that, because are you really going to start your team around Blake Griffin, who's above 30 at this point in his career? Or are you going to just say, okay, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. Let's get a lot of assets for these guys and then build a team that way. So that's definitely something that we have to look at. There's something that we have to look into. And so I think it's going to be interesting for Detroit because, like I said, I understand why Detroit's making these decisions. They feel like there's some things they got to change. They feel like there's some things they got to fix. And so, it's important for them to make sure they do what's better for the organization in the future, in the franchise's long-term future than for the right now in most respects and regards. But other news, Carmelo Anthony hit a game-winning shot the other night against the Toronto Raptors. And it was a beautiful sight. Melo has been hitting y'all with the same move for about 17 years now. It feels like he's been hitting y'all with the same jump shot, the pull up hezzy, or the step back, or the pull up pop, and it's still just as effective as it was before. And it was just great seeing Melo in that situation, playing at the level he was playing, and just overall, watching Carmelo, he's played well. One thing about Melo this year compared to the last two teams he's been with is that they're letting Carmelo be Carmelo. They're not telling him, hey, Carmelo, we need you to be a spot-up shooter. Hey, Carmelo, we need you to stay in the corner. They're saying, Carmelo, you know something? We want you to be Carmelo. We want you to be the guy that you have been, what has made you most successful, which has made you the most money. And it's worked. You can honestly say it's worked with the type of team they have in Portland. It's still very Damian Lillard dependent, but it's nice to know, hey, Carmelo can go get you 20-30. CJ can get you 20-30. Damian can get you 20-30. You know, it makes this almost, like I said, like a big three. And like I said, the Portland Trailblazers still aren't completely healthy yet, and they could make a trade at the trade deadline. So these are all things that they have to look into. These are all things that have to be seen. These are all things that have to be viewed. And you know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where, you know, if you're a Carmelo fan, this is just an amazing time for you seeing Carmelo play well, because this is why Carmelo sat here and said, you're telling me that I can't be in a top 8 rotation playing like this. It honestly, we can sit here and say it's just the way, it honestly depends on the way you want to use Melo. If you let Melo be Melo, he should be in your top 8 rotation because he is a automatic bucket off the bench or in the starting lineup, regardless of where you want to put him. As long as you know that the offense can go through Melo at times, you know Melo can get you those points. And that's what makes Melo such an effective player still at this point in his age, is, yeah, he could be a defensive liability. Because, you know, he's never been the greatest defender in the world. But, you know, sometimes you have that in the league where might not play well defensively, but he has to be able to make it up offensively. And he definitely feels like this is his best way to play, to then produce, to give back. If I don't play D, I play offense, I give you offensive production, and it makes up for it, and then you just formulate a team that can maybe work around it potentially. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Melo going forward. Obviously, they're battling for that 8th spot in the playoffs. Portland is in general. And, you know, I feel like if they make it, they need to look at this Carmelo trade, and could be one of the reasons why they were able to come out with that victory. They were able to come out, you know, winning. They were able to come out, you know, just with the success that they had. So, and last story before we go to break. Kemba Walker was ejected the other night for basically, he got teched earlier in the game. And then there was a screen that was set on him, hard screen. Should have been an offensive foul. They didn't call it. It was a bad call. And he did it right in front of his face, and he didn't make the call for some reason. Kemba showed some emotion, and he was tossed. There's obviously that argument of should referees give players more leeway emotionally, especially if they know why they're being mad. He was kind of quick to toss him, and a lot of people really was with Kemba in this argument. They feel like Kemba should have not been tossed because, I mean, you made a bad call. Own up to your bad call. And just let the man get the emotion out and then continue the ball game. Don't kick him out. And, you know, that's just something obviously referees need to work on in the NBA sometimes, because some don't do that. They just eject you from the get-go. But coming up next, we're going to get into some college basketball talk. We're going to switch over and talk about the biggest games coming up this weekend in college basketball.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Yes, sir. Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about some more news and notes around the league, Carmelo, Kemba, other things like that. But now we're going to switch over to college basketball. And we're going to talk about the biggest games of college basketball this weekend. Obviously, I'll give you the rundown of games that you should go watch, try to look out for, and why these games are going to be good and why you should, if you're a college basketball fan, you should tune in. We're going to start with some Thursday games, and you should definitely tune into tonight's games. There's a couple of great games on the slate. First big game on ESPN2 tonight at 7 o'clock, Memphis and Wichita, 21 versus 23. Both teams are at the top of their game. Obviously, Memphis losing to Georgia dropped them as low as they were in the poll this week after being in the top 10 last week, I believe. Actually, the top 15. They're going against a tough Wichita State team, which is also a big game for both teams, obviously trying to improve their resume for the tournament. So this is going to be a big game in regards for everybody in that regard. So that's obviously a game you want to tune into. Another game that's big tonight at 9 o'clock on ESPN, Arizona and Oregon, 24 versus 9. Pac-12 matchup, big matchup in the Pac-12. This is going to be at Oregon. This game is going to definitely be very interesting. Oregon is considered the favorite right now in this game. Both teams are coming in here pretty much at the same level almost in a way. Both teams are 7-3 in their last 10 coming into this game, just trying to play well, just trying to come out with a victory, because obviously that's what you want to do. You want to come out with a victory. And, just help your tournament causes and help maybe potential seedings getting into the NCAA tournament into the future. So that's obviously a super important game for both teams on both sides. And then obviously we're going to get to the Saturday games. Big game, SEC, Georgia, and Auburn. It seems like Georgia's been in big games since that Memphis game. They played Kentucky on, I believe, Monday. They played, or was it Monday? Yeah, I believe it was Monday. And then they played, actually it was Tuesday. And then they played Memphis last Saturday. Now they're playing Auburn at Auburn. 6 o'clock game on ESPN. Obviously another big game for Georgia to make that, to show that they're for real, make the tournament, helps them with a great quality win. Auburn's undefeated, so they're having the undefeated streak on the time. Undefeated streak on the line. They're 5th in the nation right now. Auburn obviously is one of the best teams in college basketball, in my opinion. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in this game. Like I said, this is going to be in Auburn. This will be a hostile environment for Georgia and a young team. Never forget, Georgia has 9 freshmen in their rotation. So it's going to be a very young team going into a very hostile environment. Another big game to look out for me is the slumping Ohio State, because they're slumping. They've lost 3 in a row going against the Indiana. Indiana's 12-3, Ohio State's 11-4. This is going to be a 12 o'clock Fox game. And obviously, like I said, Ohio State's slumping right now. They're playing some of their worst basketball, losing to, they've lost to some quality opponents. Now, let's not sit here and act like Ohio State's lost a lot of bad teams, but they're slumping. They need to get some momentum. They're going against Indiana, a good team right now. They gotta bounce back. In the last 10 games, Ohio State is 6-4. Indiana is 7-3 in their last 10. So I feel like this is a game that's big just to see if can Ohio State get back on track and get back onto their winning ways after struggling as much as they've been struggling recently in the past couple of weeks playing basketball, as this is not the Ohio State team that we thought we would end up seeing. But listen, they're not doing as bad as North Carolina, who's 8-6, and Roy Williams came out this past week saying that this team is not gifted at all, because they are playing some of the worst basketball since early 2000s. And Roy Williams got to turn this ship around, or else they could be in danger of missing the tournament for the first time in years. Another big game to look out for in the Big Ten, CBS 1 o'clock on Saturday. Number 4 Baylor, number 3 Kansas City. Obviously a huge game in the Big Ten at Allen Fieldhouse in Lawrence, Kansas. Both teams are going to be coming out there competing at their highest level, at the highest level they could potentially compete at. If I'm either one of these teams, this game I take very seriously. I know they play twice, but I want to win. Obviously Baylor's right now on 11-game winning streak. They are hot. They're like the hottest team in the country right now, going against the Kansas team. They're not in one of their last 10, and Dobson has been one of their best players, but they're going to have to come out here and defend home court against a very game Baylor team, one of the best Baylor teams that they've fielded at Baylor in years, I would feel like, and just in my personal opinion. Just watching this team play in a couple of games this season, Baylor looks like a very dominant team, very, very together team. Chemistry looks great across the board, and great coaching all around. And then obviously another big game, ACC, Notre Dame, Louisville. The reason why this is a big game is because Louisville has been up and down the last couple of games, winning, losing. So they're trying to keep it consistent. Hopefully get back on track and get a winning streak going against the Notre Dame Fighter Irish. Obviously Louisville, one of their biggest issues has been point guard. Point guard has kind of been the weakness of their team, and they're trying to still kind of figure that out. Who's going to be the point guard? Who's going to be the guy that leads them, running the show, running the team? And, point guards can be very important because obviously point guards are very important in today's game, as you clearly see. And, it's just one of those things that if Louisville wants to show that they're going to be a real team to be reckoned with, and you get that point guard position, kind of reckoned with. So, another big game from in this coming weekend is Texas Tech and West Virginia, another Big Ten matchup, ESPN2, 6 o'clock. Both teams obviously ranked teams. Obviously, Texas Tech lost their last game. West Virginia won their last game, which was against Ohio State. Obviously, both teams are coming in here trying to just get back on track. Texas Tech is 6-4 in the last 10. They're trying to start another 10-game streak. Obviously, West Virginia is playing some of their best basketball right now. Really helping them out. A lot of people wondered how good West Virginia would be this year, and you're seeing it. They're beating some of the best teams in the Big Ten, and they're beating some of the quality competition or having very close games with quality competition. So they're a team definitely you got to watch out for going into the conference play, maybe going into the conference tournament, and also into the NCAA tournament. Because at this rate, I would predict them to probably go ahead and make the NCAA tournament because I don't see why they wouldn't make the NCAA tournament. They seem to have everything going for them at a pretty good rate that can help them successfully get over the top. And just compete at a high level, and that's all you really want. And obviously another big game coming out, Villanova. Villanova trying to bounce back. Obviously bounce back from a loss, winning the other classic game they just had, going against Georgetown. Obviously these games are always tough. These conference games are very, very physical games, and Villanova, just trying to get their rhythm back. Try to figure themselves out. So again, making that push towards the NCAA tournament, they know what they are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are in terms of competing long term and competing in a way where they're going to be able to try to maybe get back to that national championship game and make another run in the tournament, maybe make an Elite Eight or a Final Four appearance. So obviously that's going to be big for them. And we got some games on Sunday. Obviously you need to look out for my personal opinion. And I think a big game to look out for is the Colorado. Colorado just cracked 25. They just got back into the top 25 this week. Now, obviously, they got back into it. They lost the game, so that's not going to help. But they're playing Utah. Utah also, same teams in the last 10 games, 7-3. Both teams have played well. It's just going to be a good game to watch on ESPNU at 6 o'clock. Colorado has been a team that when they play against the best teams, they can beat them. When they play against, teams that are like lower, they may play down to the level, but they have taken care of business. I think that's going to be obviously big for them. And then another big game, and also the Pac-12 also, 24 Arizona versus Oregon State, 11-3 versus 11-3. This is going to be on Fox Sports 1. Obviously, Arizona is just trying to keep momentum. And obviously this is a big game for Oregon State. Because again, this is always big, these beginning games of the conference, because you're playing against some of the best competition that your conference has. You played them twice. You beat them one time, that's a quality win for you. And if you lost, that's a quality loss. So if you're one of the teams like Oregon State, you'll always want to try to win games like this because they can help you with your tournament resume when it gets closer to it, because then you'll be able to produce at a high level and potentially get into the tournament and maybe make a potential run that could shock the nation, shock the world. Because, you always have those. You always have those. And you just never know when those are going to happen. And obviously, in general, with all teams at this time of the year, you want to make sure that you win these games. That's why, like I said, with the Georgia situation, they beat Memphis, which is quality win. Even though they lost to Kentucky, that's a quality loss. And then they still have to play Kentucky on the road. And if they beat Kentucky on the road, that's actually going to be more of an impressive win than if they had beat them at home. And now they're playing Auburn, so obviously this would be more of an impressive win. They beat them at Auburn than they won if they won at Georgia. And that's why I feel like it was also with Georgia, that win at Memphis is more important because it was at Memphis. And also just for other teams in general. Road wins against big-time teams are always going to be more important for you going into the tournament because you went into a hostile environment and beat one of the best teams than winning one at home, even though it's a quality win regardless, in my personal opinion. And the next segment, we're going to talk about NBA trades. We're going to do a little trade machine. There's going to be some players that I will mention, and I'll give my opinion on would I trade for them or why wouldn't I trade for them coming in here on the podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. And this segment, we're going to do some trade machine type thing where I'm going to be listing some guys on potential people that could be traded, even some guys maybe y'all didn't think that could potentially be traded. And I'm just going to give y'all my thoughts on what I think about them, if I would trade them, if I was GM, why and why not. If you missed last segment, we were talking about college basketball. We were talking about the latest games coming up this weekend, the biggest games that you should probably try to tune in and see and everything. So, we're going to get right to it. And so the first person I'm going to bring up is Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal, Washington Wizards shooting guard, just signed a 5-year deal. So he's still relatively young. So you never know, a team might feel like he could really still add something to the team. If I was a GM, it depends on what I would need at that time in a team. It would depend what is my team lacking. Let's say I was like the general manager of the Lakers, as obviously they considered it last year. I know you may be looking for another guard. Bradley Beal, one thing about him, he's very versatile. He can handle the ball. He could also score. So he's a very multi-dimensional guard. I think that if I was the GM, Bradley Beal would be someone I definitely would consider trading for. I feel like unless we have that part of our team solidified, I don't see why you wouldn't consider a Bradley Beal. I mean, he is considered in a league that feels like the shooting guard is going slightly extinct, a top 3-point guard. I mean, not top 3-point guard, a top 3 shooting guard in the league. And so I feel like if that's the case, then why not? Bradley Beal can help any team. He can help any team be better. He can help any team win. And so I feel like if you're a team looking for a guy, like I said, why not Bradley Beal? I think Bradley Beal would be someone that you definitely should look to try to go after if he's available in the market. I don't think the Wizards will make him available, but if he was definitely somebody I would definitely look at trying to add to your team, because I do feel like it would work and it would help. Any team that needs a guard like Bradley Beal would be a great addition to the rosters. Another guy, obviously, we talked about him earlier, D Rose. If I was them, it depends on my situation. If I'm a championship team, maybe team potentially, or a playoff team, and like my backup point guard position or my guard play in general wasn't the best, I definitely would look into trading for Derrick Rose. I definitely look into adding Derrick Rose. I definitely would highly consider adding Derrick Rose, because for me, Derrick Rose is a guy, like I said, he's not what he used to be, but he can still get you big buckets. He can still be clutch for you. You can have him out there in the fourth quarter lineup, and he can do a lot of things for you. He can run the show. And, maybe point guard goes down. I feel pretty good about my point guard being Derrick Rose if my main point guard went down. So I think that Derrick Rose would be a great addition to a lot of teams. It just depends. Like I said, it depends. Obviously, since he's on a Detroit team who isn't doing too much right now, and it looks like they're probably going to just give up on the season, I think that obviously a team that's young wouldn't really need him. Nor do I think, especially since Derrick Rose is over 30, that would be his interest. Because he's been on a lot of bad teams in his career, if you think about it. I think the last time he made the playoffs was with actually made the playoffs and actually played was with Chicago. I don't think, because I know he's on Timberwolves. I think they made it one year, I think maybe. I think that was not the last year Jimmy Butler, but the last full year Jimmy Butler was there. And so Derrick Rose probably is looking to try to contribute to a championship team now in his career, being older. And I think if you're a team looking for a top-flight backup point guard or somebody who can spell, and maybe if you need him, maybe even be your starting point guard, Derrick Rose would not be a bad option if I was a GM. Next guy, Andre Drummond, also on the Detroit Pistons. This one's kind of iffy because, yes, Drummond is averaging a career high in points, and yes, Drummond is a rebounding machine. But with the NBA switching to what it is now, and big men, even at the center position, being able to shoot three, he is kind of a liability defensively because if you're going against a team who goes small or a team that's big man can stretch the floor, Drummond, I feel like, becomes more neutralized in that regard, in that role. I think it's tough because it's kind of like the same thing that kind of hurt Dwight Howard. The league changed and he was just a back-to-the-back type of guy. Like, there's a place for him on a team with his talent. Like, I'm not saying that he isn't a guy you should go after, but if I was a GM, depending on how much Detroit wants in return will determine if I want him. If it's me, I'm leaning no because I just feel like I'll probably want to stick more with what's happening in the NBA and make sure whoever I get, maybe if I had to trade for a big man, was more, unless it's like this. If I traded for a guy who just blocks shots and get a couple under the rim baskets and he was just like a decent player, that would be fine. But Drummond's like a star player, technically, by his position and being one of the top centers in the game. It's just he's more of a traditional center. So knowing that he'll want a max, knowing that how much Detroit might want you to give up for him, I just feel like I don't know if I want Drummond on my team being in that situation, especially with him having a year left. Do I really want this 1 year? I mean, if you feel like it's worth it and you just feel like you're a center away, then go ahead and do it. If you're a team that is running maybe to compete for years to come with the team that you have now, I wouldn't necessarily make that trade. I don't think that would be the best trade to be made. In my personal opinion, I think you would be a little bit hesitant to make a trade like that, just with my thoughts on that situation. Another guy, Danilo Gallinari. If I was a GM, I would make this trade because Danilo, it's funny, Danilo Gallinari is not a bad player by any stretch of the imagination. Danilo Gallinari is a guy who plays 3-4, stretch the floor, he gets you about 16, 17 a game, a quality player on your team. And he obviously can have a big game every blue moon too. So I think that if I was a GM, I would definitely trade for him. If we need another wing defender, a wing shooter, definitely would look into Dio Gallinari. Plus, if you maybe want to do some more small ball, he could play that 4 spot and thrive in it. He can be a little bit of a liability defensively, but I think for what you may ask him to do for your franchise and your team, he would be a good fit. I think he'd be a great fit. I think teams currently right now, I think the Bucks could use a Danilo Gallinari. I think that would be great. I think the 76ers, that was a team like I mentioned earlier that could use a Danilo Gallinari. I think he'll fit in with what they have and really help them push to the levels of being a championship contender and a championship team, in my personal opinion. So I think that Danilo Gallinari would be a great pickup for any team that wants him. And I mean, but right now he's still playing well in Oklahoma City too, so it's not like he's unhappy in any means or any stretch of the imagination with Oklahoma City. So I definitely would think that would be a good move to potentially make for a team who's, like I said, looking just to finalize that roster and get their team over the top and get them winning and things like that. And the last player, Andre Iguodala. Obviously, if I was a GM, I'd go for him. A guy, 3-and-D guy. He's your prototypical NBA 3-and-D, shoot 3. And obviously, Andre Iguodala, especially at this point in his career, is known for his defense. You can usually put him on your best defender. And he can do a pretty commendable job. I think, obviously, Iguodala is more of you don't know how much longer he'll play, so he might be another 1-2 year option. A guy who obviously said if you're a team that maybe feels like you win those 1 to 2 years, he'd be perfect. I understand why teams like the Clippers and the Lakers want him because of the value he could bring to them, bringing in that extra defender and also bringing in that extra 3-point shooter. And if needed, Andre Iguodala can make some plays too. He can make some clutch shots. He's done it for the Warriors for the last few years. So I think that obviously also could be a very great addition to the team and a great addition to what they want to do long term. If I'm a team that is looking, like I said, to make that championship run, maybe looking at my window and saying, okay, well, we have this amount of time left and we need to bring in a guy who can defend the team's best player but also make threes at the other end. Take some of the pressure off some of your best players or better players and be able to know that, hey, we know Andre Diaco can come in there and play well. He's a veteran. He knows how to play. He's been into tough moments. He's been in the tough spots. You can put him in your last lineup to end the game. So it's one of those things that, you know, if I'm a GM, I definitely trade for Andre Diaco. I feel like he could bring a lot to my team. And obviously that's what you want if you're, you know, a coach in a franchise, a player who's going to bring a lot to your team if you're trying to make that championship run. Well, that's all for me today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Please don't forget to subscribe to us and leave us a review. Also, please don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.